Good evening. It's good to be back together with the Chabad of the Shore community. We're joined virtually, but in some ways we are closer in this way than other times when I've come to your community and visited you in the past, because now you're in my home. And presumably I'm in your home. So in that respect, we are even more closely bonded. And that's something actually that I wanted to speak about tonight, is the central role of the Jewish home in our tradition and our future as a people. Before I begin, however, I want to acknowledge the news that we got out of Shabbos about the passing of Rabbi Shapiro's grandmother, Gutta Bas Peretz, Aleha Shalom. I personally knew Rabbi Shapiro's grandmother, and she was a very, very strong and courageous woman, a true hero, somebody who faced real challenge and adversity and had a strength of character and a passion for life and faith and values that was an inspiration not just to her family but to everyone who knew her. She got married in Soviet Russia during World War II, during a very tumultuous, disruptive time, and came to America, and she built a family which, I mean, if you know your own Rabbi Shapiro, that's just one example of the fruits that grew from the seeds that she planted. And I think it's appropriate, if we're talking tonight, and tonight our learning together is in the merit of Gutta Bas Peretz, that when we're speaking in the merit of a Jewish woman, we should speak about the survival of the Jewish people, and not just the fact that Jewish people have survived, but that the Jewish people were able to not just survive, but to thrive under all conditions. And that is in great part due to Jewish women. We did not endure 2,000 years in exile because we were a great and mighty nation. We did not have a homeland, we did not have a government, we did not have a military, we did not have any of the things that a nation has. At many junctures, we couldn't own property. We had no money. We had none of the resources that make a nation strong. But we always had the Jewish home, and the Jewish home was always led by Jewish mothers. So at this time, when we're all in our homes, I think it's an appropriate topic to discuss. I want to take us back to the very first Pesach. The Pesach which we commemorate at our Seder table, when we say to our children, this is because of what God did for me when he took me out of Egypt. The very first Pesach was in Egypt, before the Jews were redeemed. And many of us are familiar with the story of the sprinkling of the blood on the doorposts on that night, the night before the Exodus. Of course, what was this blood? Where was the blood taken from? It was the blood from the Passover sacrifice. In the times when the temple stood, there was a Passover sacrifice. If you look on your Seder plate, there's the zroya. Some use a shank bone, some use a chicken neck, but it's a piece of meat or a bone as a remembrance of the Passover sacrifice, which was a lamb or a goat, which was brought to the temple in Jerusalem and slaughtered there in the temple. The blood was then sprinkled on the altar, and then each group would bring the lamb or the goat back to their home and roast it and eat it there. So the blood that was sprinkled on the doorposts in Egypt on that last night was the blood of this sacrifice. However, there's one major difference between the way that the Passover sacrifice was performed all of the years when the Jewish people had the Holy Temple, and the way that it was performed the very first time while we were still in Egypt. And that is, we didn't have a temple. The temple hadn't been built yet. We hadn't even entered the land yet. The 40 years wandering in the desert, we had a temporary or portable version of the temple, a portable sanctuary called the Mishkan. But we didn't even have that yet. So what did we do? Everything was done in the home. And not only was it done in the home because there was no other place to do it. If you look what it says in the Torah regarding that evening, it says very clearly, Hashem tells Moshe to tell the Jewish people, no one should leave their home tonight. So on the very first night of the birth of the Jewish nation, on the very first night of redemption, or the eve of redemption, more accurately, we were quarantined. We were all isolated in our respective homes. Nobody could go out and nobody could come in. So it's very interesting. The situation that we're in right now, getting ready for a Pesach, where we are stuck at home, so to speak, is very reminiscent of the actual original Pesach, which we commemorate every year at our own Seder. And there's an important lesson here to be learned. On the very first Pesach, we didn't have a temple. We didn't have a central structure. We didn't have that holy place to go to. Rather, what did we have? We had the home. And the home was in place of the temple. The home was the temple. So that the sprinkling of the blood that was normally done on the altar in the temple, that year, the first year, the sprinkling of the blood was done on the doorposts in the home. What does that mean? That means that each Jewish house became the temple, and the doorposts of each Jewish house was like the altar, and that the center of Judaism wasn't in Jerusalem, in the Holy Temple. The center of Judaism became each and every individual Jewish home. So it's an amazing concept. From the very first day, from the birth of our nation, the message was clear. Judaism is centered in the home. We refer to a Jewish home even as a mikdash ma'at, a miniature sanctuary. Each one of our homes is a temple. Each one of our homes is the center of Jewish life. You know, I'll tell you a story. I was one time on a panel of rabbis talking to lay leaders, and one of them asked me, he was a president of a very prominent synagogue. I won't mention where, I won't mention what city even, but he said to me, he says, Rabbi, we have a problem in our synagogue, which is we're trying to involve the women more in synagogue life. How do we convince them that they have a central role in the synagogue? So I said to him, why do you think you can fool them? Why are you going to try to tell them they have a central role in the synagogue? I mean, it's an Orthodox synagogue. Are you going to have a woman as to be chazan next week? So then, don't lie to people. Don't Don't insult their intelligence. So he got very, very, I could tell he was very dismayed by the answer. I said to him, how about you do a service to both the men and the women and start telling them the truth that the center of Judaism isn't the synagogue. You want to tell them that women have a central role in the synagogue. It's actually not accurate. But what could you tell them the truth that the synagogue is not the center of Judaism? What is the center of Judaism? We learned from the very first night of our peoplehood. The center of Judaism is the home. And who are the directors of the Jewish homes? The Jewish women. The Akeres Habayis, the mainstay of the home, the foundation of the home, is the Jewish mother. As I mentioned before, we survived 2,000 years in exile. And it wasn't because during 2,000 years in exile, we were going around building massive cathedrals like other religions. We didn't have that kind of funding, resources, freedom, but we didn't have those aspirations. Because the Jewish focus was never on trying to build a massive place outside of the home. The Jewish focus was on building the strength of the home. And it wasn't shuls run by rabbis that got us through 2,000 years of exile. It was Jewish homes run by Jewish mothers. So I said this to this fellow, and he was very, like I said, he was visibly dismayed. So afterwards, I spoke to him after the Q&A, and I said to him, by the way, can I suggest something to you? You identified yourself as the president of a synagogue. So obviously, for you, everything's all about the synagogue. So the more people who feel that the synagogue is the center of everything, then the more people you are a leader of. So I said to him, let me tell you a story. When Richard Nixon met Golda Meir, so he told her, he says, you know who you're dealing with? I am the president of 200 million citizens. At that time, the population of America was around 200 million. So he said, Nixon says to Golda, I'm the president of 200 million citizens. And she says, you think that's impressive? I am the prime minister of 5 million prime ministers. What does that mean? First of all, it means you can't tell Jews what to do. What that means is, from the very beginning of Jewish peoplehood, Judaism was centralized in each home. Each home was the temple. Each home was the center. So Golda Meir was saying something actually very true when she said, I'm the prime minister of 5 million prime ministers. Each Jew is a leader of their own home. So you have a president of a shul, or a rabbi of a shul, or a chazan, and those are all very nice things. Very nice things. But that's not the center of Jewish life. The center of Jewish life is the home, where each family are the leaders of world Jewry. Yes, that's right. The leader of world Jewry is in each home. You want to act globally, think, or you want to, what do they say? Think globally, act locally. That's right. If you want to have more power, keep the focus on your immediate sphere of influence. When we are, quote unquote, stuck at home, we have the most power. When we have the opportunity to be together as families, especially to influence our children, and to have our children really have the opportunity to bond with us, to ask us questions, to prepare for Pesach together, and to have the important discussions that we should be having, we are so much more powerful than when we try to overreach and we think that we're taking on the world. You know, what's Jewish continuity? You know, one of those big catchphrases. It's such a big concept. It's so big, it means nothing. Make it pertinent. Make it personal. Make it individual. talk to your child today for 5 minutes, that's Jewish continuity. So less is more, smaller is bigger, personal is universal. That's the paradox. There was a letter the Rebbe once wrote, Erev Pesach, or just a few days before Pesach, and the Rebbe mentioned how the Passover sacrifice was performed in the home that the first year, and the Rebbe mentioned the importance, the power of the Jewish homes, and then there's a whole section of that letter. It's a public letter, a pastoral letter addressed, like an open letter addressed to the entire Jewish people, and there's a whole paragraph there addressed to the rabbis. The Rebbe says the rabbis are at fault. They try to focus on issues that are so big as to be meaningless. What does that mean? Back in times of communism, after the revolution in 1917 in Russia, so they used to have communist indoctrinators who would go from village to village and try to preach communism to the peasants. So one time this indoctrinator comes in and he's teaching communism. He's explaining how it works, and now he wants to make sure that the little farmers listening understand how it works. So he says to this one guy, he says, "Comrade, let's make sure you understand how communism works. If you have 2 cows, what do you do?" 2 cows? I keep 1 cow and I give 1 cow to the party. He says, "That's right. Okay, comrade, you have 2 goats. What do you do?" 2 goats? I keep 1 goat and I give 1 goat to the party. He says, "That's right. Very good. Okay, comrade, you have 2 chickens. What do you do?" Silence. He says, "Comrade, 2 chickens. What do you do?" Silence. No answer. Right? Crickets. "Comrade, 2 chickens. What do you do?" Still no answer. The communist says, "Comrade, I don't understand. 2 cows. A cow's a big animal, and you're ready to give away a cow. 2 goats. A goat's not as big as a cow, but a goat's pretty big. You're ready to give away a goat. 2 little chickens, and now you hesitate?" The farmer says, "Yeah, but there's a difference." Communist says, "What?" Farmer says, "I really have 2 chickens." It's very easy to talk about giving away the cow that you don't have, or giving away the goat that you don't have. But now you're talking about the 2 chickens. You really have 2 chickens. Now it becomes real. So in that general letter, that pastoral letter, the Rebbe speaks about how the rabbis have to stop promoting the letters in Yiddish. The Rebbe says, "Große Weltproblemen," big global problems, big global issues, and encourage the people to focus on their sphere of influence and to empower them to realize that the centrality of the home puts them right in the epicenter of Judaism, and that each Jewish family are the leaders of world Jewry and has the responsibility and the privilege of being the ones who carry on our tradition. So it's not some giant thing that's so big that we don't even know who's taking care of it. Some nameless, faceless task that's assigned to a committee somewhere, some blue ribbon committee, right? No. This is about your home, your family. Again, like I said, if you're stuck at home, we have our children home, our children aren't in school. So this is a perfect opportunity. A conversation you have with your child can be something they'll remember forever. I was speaking to a father a week ago. Maybe it was a couple weeks ago already. But when we were just getting used to this quarantine type routine, and he was telling me it was stressful. He's home. He has his kids around all the time. So I said to him like this. I said, "Look, there's going to come a point where this is going to come to an end, okay? And this will be a memory of the past. So here's my question, and this is really a question to all of us. When your kids look back and remember the quarantine time, whether it's a few weeks or it's whatever, how long, I don't want to say, but however long it is, and it's going to come to an end, and then they're going to look back on it one day. How are your children going to remember that time when we were all stuck at home together? Are they going to remember it as a time of stress and strain? Or are they going to remember, it was kind of weird. People were getting sick. That wasn't good. So that's not a happy reason to all be together. But the truth is that the actual being together, the being together under one roof, having so much contact with each other, day in, day out, that part was kind of nice. And they're going to look back and they're going to remember it fondly. And they're going to remember the bonding. They're going to remember those 5-minute conversations where you turn to them and you have a discussion with them on their level. And you answer the questions the way that they care about them, the way that's pertinent to them on their level. So all of this is a blessing. At least this aspect of it is an incredible blessing, and it's the most authentically Jewish thing that could be. Because if you look at the origins of our people, if you look at the origins of Pesach, if you look how Pesach was the very first night that it was celebrated, the Torah tells us the Jews couldn't leave their home, but the home became the temple. That every home became the temple, and the doorposts were like the altar, and everything you would normally do in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, you were doing in each individual Jewish home. And that truth remains today. That truth remains today. The holiest place in the world is the Jewish home. And it's because of the Jewish mother. I'll tell you a related concept. It says that in the very end of the book of Genesis, very, very end, right when Jacob is passing away. So Jacob came down to Egypt when his son Joseph was the viceroy. So they weren't slaves yet. Everything was good. And Jacob is passing away. And on his deathbed, he tells Joseph, whatever you do, promise me you will not bury me here in Egypt. You must bring me back to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel, and bury me in Israel, and more specifically in Hebron, in the in the cave of Machpelah. And Joseph swears and he promises to do so. Now, Rashi, the foremost commentator, points out that there was a little bit of a elephant in the room. By the way, I bought my friend for his birthday a gift. I bought him an elephant. He told me thank you. I said, don't mention it. They say there's the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about the elephant in the room. What was the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to mention? Well, Joseph's mother was Rachel. Rachel passed away while the family was traveling. Where was she buried? Not in Hebron, not in the cave of Machpelah, where the patriarchs and matriarchs are all buried. All of them are buried there except for her. She was buried on the side of the road, near Ephrat. So the elephant in the room is Joseph is thinking to himself, how could you tell me now that the most important thing is that you should be buried in this holy place, the second holiest place in all of Judaism, second only to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, is Hebron and the cave of Machpelah. So Joseph is thinking, you're telling me this is so important, but that's not where you buried my mother. So Rashi brings a medrash that gives a little bit of the dialogue that was happening at that time that's not recorded in the verses. The Medrash explains that at that moment Jacob says to Joseph, look, I understand you're wondering now why I didn't do this for your mother, and I'm going to tell you why. Because she's going to need to be there later on. In the future, we're going to leave Egypt, we're going to enter our homeland, we're going to build a temple, we're going to have a king, we're going to be settled here in our homeland. Then there's going to be a destruction. The Babylonians are going to come, they're going to destroy the temple, they're going to wreak havoc, and they're going to take all the Jews and bring them into captivity, bring them as slaves into Babylonia. And as they're leaving, as they're being dragged in chains out of Jerusalem, they're going to pass Ephrat. And on the side of the road, is the grave of Mama Rachel, of the matriarch Rachel, and as the Jews are passing by, she's going to daven, she's going to pray for them, and it's going to shorten the exile so that the first exile after the destruction of the first temple was only 70 years. So, it's a beautiful explanation that basically Rachel was buried where she was in order to be of use to her children, her ancestors, or rather the opposite, her descendants, many generations henceforth. It's amazing, in this story you see the difference between masculine and feminine Judaism. I mentioned before the shul president who wanted to convince women that they had a central role in the synagogue. A synagogue is a masculine place. It's just, that's the fact. It's not that there's no role for women, but it's a masculine place. And men have, for the most part, the leadership positions in a synagogue. But you know why? Because synagogues are mostly for male activity. What do I mean by that? There's a difference between doing and being. There's doing Jewish and there's being Jewish. Doing Jewish is you go to a Jewish place and you put on your tefillin and you put on your talis and you pray with a minyan and you say all the things you can only say with a minyan, and have your Torah reading. And there's a lot of stuff to do. It's a very, there's a lot of Jewish programming, a lot of Jewish activity to do, right? And it feels very, very Jewish. That's called doing Jewish. You're doing all these Jewish things. According to halacha, women are exempt from positive time-bound commandments. All that Jewish doing stuff, they're not obligated. Rather, there's another aspect of Judaism, a much deeper aspect, really the essence of Judaism, which is Jewish being. What's Jewish being? Jewish being means whatever you're doing is Jewish because you're a Jew, and therefore what you're doing is Jewish. So when a mother of small children is home on the night of Yom Kippur, on the night of Kol Nidre, and her husband goes and puts on the white kittel and he looks like an angel, and he goes with the talis and he goes to the shul and he hears the chazan singing and the rabbi says a beautiful sermon, that's called Jewish doing. And maybe the mother of young children is at home doing bedtimes and, feeding kids, and she can't even eat because she's fasting and taking care of the house. And that's called Jewish being. That the activity itself is not overtly holy, but it's actually holy because you're imbuing it with the holiness, because that's what a Jew has to do. A man goes out to synagogue and he does all his man Jewish activities, right? But at the end, he's got to come home to the place of Jewish being. The synagogue is a place of Jewish doing. The home is a place of Jewish being. What does that mean? He goes, maybe he'll go out and he'll daven and he'll be part of the minyan, but at the end, he's got to come home and sit on the floor and play with his kids. Now, sitting on the floor playing with your kids is not overtly a Jewish thing. But you are Jewish, therefore whatever you do becomes Jewish because you are a Jew. In other words, everything is the service of Hashem. Everything becomes spiritual, everything becomes holy when you have that intention, when that becomes the idea. That I'm not just playing with my kids because, you have to do that to be a nice guy. I'm doing this because this is a holy obligation. God entrusted me with these precious souls, these eternal souls that existed before the creation of the world. It's unfathomable. They came to this world, and I'm here to just for a few years. I have them during their formative years to give them nurturing, positive experiences, so that they will feel good, they'll feel secure, they'll feel confident, they'll have a positive childhood, so that they'll grow up to be the strong and courageous Jews who will be able to carry on our tradition for the next generation. And how do I do that? Not necessarily overt mitzvahs like Jewish ritual that happens in the synagogue. A lot of it has to do with sitting on the floor and playing Uno with the kids. Simple stuff that's not overtly Jewish, but it's all Jewish because everything we do becomes Jewish when we realize that we always are Jewish. There's Jewish doing and there's Jewish being. This is Jewish being. And I think a lot of times things become so masculinized, we think of the synagogue and Jewish doing as so important. We forget. I mentioned it before, and I'm going to say it again. We did not survive 2,000 years of exile because of our synagogues and our rabbis. Yes, it's important. It's a role that needs to be filled, but the mainstay and the secret of our survival was Jewish homes and Jewish mothers. Not the center of Jewish doing, but the center of Jewish being. And I think this is very, very important for us to remember now when we're cut off from the center of Jewish doing, when we can't go to the place where all the Jewish rituals take place, and we don't have the minyan, and we don't have the chazan, and we don't have the beautiful speeches from the rabbis, and we don't have the Torah readings, and we don't have the kiddush, and all that ritual that happens in the place of Jewish doing. But you know what? We're not missing. For now, this is what we're supposed to be. The rabbis already told us, don't go to shul. Don't go to the minyan. So what happens is, now we're not missing. This becomes everything. And in fact, this was everything from the very first night when the Jews were in Egypt. Everything took place in the home. The temple was the home. Everything that takes place in Jerusalem was in each Jewish house. And as it was then, so it is now. But I want to go back to the difference between men and women. So Jacob tells Joseph, you must bury me in Hebron, in the second holiest spot in the world. His wife Rachel, on the other hand, was buried at the side of the road. What do you see there? What do you see? That even in death, even in burial, a man wants to go to a place that's already holy. Like a man goes to shul. What does a woman do? What did Rachel do? She went to a place that was ordinary, regular, nondescript place at the side of the road, and by her being there, she turned it into a holy place. So a man goes to a place that's already holy. He goes to shul. A woman goes to a place that's ordinary. A home. What's a home? Just an ordinary place. But she won't let it stay ordinary. She turns the home into a place that's holier even than a shul. And that's what happened by Rachel being buried in that place. How many prayers have been uttered? How many heartfelt prayers were tearfully spoken at Keva Rachel, at the place where Rachel was buried, so that she could be there for her children when they were brought out into exile. And if you would ask any Jewish mother, do you want to go to the place where the spiritual action is? Or do you want to be in the place where your children need you? The place where my children need me. Well, I got news for the women and the men. Right now, the way Hashem has things, we're all stuck, quote unquote, in the place where our children need us. We can't go out to shul for our Judaism. So what do we have to do? We have to realize that our Judaism is right here. It's in our homes. We have to make our Judaism. And again, that's through the day-to-day interactions that we have with our children. We don't even realize the memories they're forming. They're going to look back. They're going to remember. They're going to remember this Pesach. If they only remember one Pesach from their whole childhood, this one will stand out. This one for sure will stand out. The only question is, in what way will it stand out? And that's up to us. Now, I just want to mention one other thing. And that is, the Baal Shem Tov taught that everything you see and hear is an instruction from Hashem. Everything's divine providence, therefore Hashem is teaching us lessons in everything. Now, something that the entire world is experiencing simultaneously, for sure has a lesson. Many, many lessons. But I want to share with you one possible lesson that we can learn from the headlines, from the situation that's going on in the world right now. We know that one of the real insidious factors with the spread of coronavirus is that people are contagious before they feel sick. In fact, some people have symptoms that are so mild, or maybe even they're non-symptomatic, that they are spreaders and they don't even know that they've ever had the virus. So we see something very scary, that people are making other people sick and they don't even know Not only that they don't know who they made sick, they don't even know that they made anyone sick because they don't even know that they're sick. They don't know that they themselves are sick. Our sages tell us that the midah tova, the attribute of goodness in the world, is meruba, is bountifully, disproportionately greater than the midah peronis, than the negative attribute in the world. That means that if anything exists in the world that's negative, we have a counterpart in goodness that is disproportionately greater. So where do we find this idea of being an influencer and not even knowing it? So there's a saying, our sages say, that words from the heart enter the heart. That when you speak sincerely, then people listen. Words from the heart enter the heart. But I had a teacher and mentor, a senior colleague of mine, a shliach in Chicago, Illinois, where I grew up, Rabbi Daniel Moskowitz. He used to say, words from the heart enter the heart, but we don't always know whose heart. We don't always know whose heart. We put it out there, we don't know where it lands. And then he used to tell a story, I heard from him a number of times, about running out of gas. He told a story about how he took his wife to the hospital on a Friday afternoon before Shabbos. They didn't want to go before Shabbos, but that was the only time they could get an appointment. They finished up the appointment, they came out from the hospital, and his car was out of gas. He remembers filling it the other day, so he thinks that it was siphoned. Why was it siphoned? I don't know how familiar you are with Chicago, but there are many neighborhoods in Chicago that are the kinds of neighborhoods where your gas would get siphoned if you were parked on the street. And that's the kind of neighborhood it was. It was a very bad neighborhood. And now he's out of gas and he's in this really, really high crime inner city neighborhood on the south side. So he says to his wife, lock the doors, do not open them for anybody. I'm walking to the gas station and I'm going to get gas. So he walks to the gas station. He's very nervous, does not want to be walking there. He sees a police officer. He waves to the police officer. The police officer wouldn't even slow down for him. He just told him, hey, what are you walking in this neighborhood for? He kind of rebuked him, Chicago's finest. And that was it. And then finally he gets to the gas station and he asks if he can buy a gallon of gas. The guy says, yeah, go ahead. He says, can I buy a carton, a jug to put the gas in, a container? He's like, we don't have those containers. The guy, by the way, is behind this big, thick, bulletproof glass, right? That kind of neighborhood. And we don't have a canister. So he's like, oh, okay, is there another gas station? Yeah, another 6 blocks down. He doesn't want to walk in this neighborhood. So he starts going through the trash, and he finds in the trash a big plastic jug, an apple juice jug. And he's filling the apple juice jug with gas. And as he does, some guy from the neighborhood pulls up and says, hey man, come on, get in my car. So Rabbi Moskowitz is thinking to himself, what's more dangerous? To walk back in this bad neighborhood or to take a ride with a stranger? So as he's thinking about it, the guy says, come on, it'll be a mitzvah. So he's like, what? A mitzvah? Are you Jewish? The guy's like, come on, man. Do I look Jewish? No, I'm not Jewish. Get in the car. So he gets in the car, and the guy says to Rabbi Moskowitz, he says, you're Chabad. He says, how do you know Chabad? So the guy says, I went to college on the East Coast, and I had a Jewish roommate. And every Saturday morning, the rabbi from Chabad would come to my dorm room and knock on the door and try to get my roommate for the prayers, because he needed 10 Jewish men. And I used to tell the rabbi, I feel so bad. I'll come, I'll help. And he used to tell me, no, I need 10 Jews, so you can't help with this. But everyone can do a mitzvah. That's why I learned the word mitzvah. So when you see an opportunity to do a mitzvah that you can do, you should do it. Well, I saw you. You looked, I saw you with the big beard and the hat. You reminded me of that rabbi. So all of a sudden I remembered, oh yeah, I could do a mitzvah. Let me do a mitzvah that I can do. What can I do? I can pick you up. I can drive you. I know you don't want to be walking in this bad neighborhood. And so you gave me the chance to do a mitzvah. So he says, thank you so much. He's so touched. He gets out of the car. The guy drops him off. He puts the gas in the car. He and his wife Rabbi Moskowitz and his wife get home, in time for Shabbos. So then he tells his wife, he says, the amazing thing is, there's some campus shliach, right? Some college campus Chabad rabbi on the East Coast who doesn't even know the effect that he had. In fact, if you would ask him if he would even remember going to that dorm room, he'd say, oh yeah, that's the place where I would try to get the guy to come to the minyan, and he wouldn't come. Yeah, big failure. I never really accomplished anything there. He doesn't realize how much he accomplished. That the non-Jewish roommate who he spoke to while he was waiting or trying to get the Jewish roommate to come to the minyan was affected so much that years later, he sees a Jew and he wants to do a mitzvah and he wants to help him, and by doing this, he helped Rabbi Moskowitz and his wife get home in time for Shabbos. So, words from the heart enter the heart, but we don't always know which heart. We don't realize our influence. Now, the thing is, I said before that the positive is disproportionately greater than the negative. So how do we see it's disproportionately greater? How do we see that it's far greater than the way people can spread a virus? So I'll tell you another story. And this is a story that the Rabbi told at a gathering once in the summertime. In the summertime, they still do, send Merkez Shluchim. That means young men who will go to small communities that are too small to sustain a full-time Chabad presence. So the Rebbe was speaking about the summertime roving rabbis, and about how last summer a young man went to a small town and thinks he accomplished nothing. And then the Rebbe started describing and saying, this young man, though, he doesn't realize what he accomplished. We found out what he accomplished. There was an old man who used to live in Europe before the war. This is a Farbrengen in the 1950s. The Rebbe was speaking in the 50s. He's saying there was an old man who was sitting in his house, looking out of his window. This old man saw the rabbi, the rabbinical student, the young, man in his 20s, walking down the street, and the old man saw him with a beard and with a hat, with tzitzis hanging out, and he said, oh, that looks like my grandfather. That looks how the Jews used to look back in Europe before the war. Where is this young man from? Is he from Ukraine? Is he from Galicia? Is he from Poland? And then they told him, no, this young man is from Boston. He's a Bostonian. The Rebbe said, a Bostonian. The Rebbe explained that in America, the people from Boston are considered to be very aristocratic and very highbrow. And then this man was so impressed that a Bostonian is dressed like this. He looks like this. Looks like a traditional Jew from the Alta Heim, from the old country. And the Rebbe says, and this young man who was being seen through the window, he doesn't even know that the old man saw him, and that it affected the old man and the old man's children and children's children. So here you see something, how the virus cannot affect, our positive influence can affect. Because with the virus, if there's social distancing, if there's 6 feet, then you can't affect somebody. Here, somebody was standing outside in the street, and someone was inside in his home and being affected. And the truth is, we can even go further than that, because look what modern technology has made possible. Like right now, I'm sitting in Five Towns in Long Island, and you're on the Jersey Shore, and we're able to reach each other. And we can reach much more than that as well. We can reach all over the world. But the most important place to reach, just to bring this back home, no pun intended, is right here at home. And that's, please remember, if you have children at home, you have little KGB agents at home. They see everything, they remember everything, they don't forget anything. They used to tell an old joke in the Soviet Union. A guy calls the KGB and he says, KGB? They say, yes. He says, if a parrot flies in your window, I do not agree with any of his political views. Guy lost a parrot. Okay, whatever. All right. Anyways, our children are little KGB agents. They see everything, they hear everything, they remember it all forever. We have an incredible opportunity to be real influencers right now, to determine the type of Jewish experience our children have, not in a place of Jewish doing like a synagogue, in the place of Jewish being, in the Jewish home. And again, as I said, that is primarily through the strong Jewish mothers who give us that connection to our golden chain, our golden heritage, going back to the matriarchs, to selfless mothers like Rachel, the matriarch, who chose to be in the place where her children need her, and instead of going to a place that was already holy, but going to an ordinary place and making it holy. And that's the lesson for all of us. We should really take to heart this lesson. Again, Gutta Bas Peretz should derive much nachas from her children and children's children, and be an example for us, an inspiration for us in raising healthy, happy, thriving Jewish families and Jewish homes. May you and yours have a very happy, healthy Pesach.